They're probably all in Washington, D.C., waiting to know the truth that I will share. So, first of all, hi, it's good to see everybody. It really is. It's good. And yeah, there is news in the world. We're going to start out with a bland, happy note. Judge Khaled Kaboub became the first Muslim appointed to Israel's Supreme Court. The only reason I mention that, there have been Arabs appointed to the Supreme Court. All the previous ones on the 15-person court have been Christian Arabs. This is the first time that they're Muslim Arabs. And, you know, that's it. It's just, there are 15 judges at the highest level in Israel, and one now is an Arab Muslim judge. And I like that. And for whatever good it does to help define what Israel is, that's fine. My next benign report is about Nancy Pelosi. First of all, I didn't realize that Nancy was only 2 years younger than I am. There was an article in the New York Times this week about, do we really need 80-year-old people running the country? And you know, first of all, that ageism offended me enormously, but a lot of truth there. Nancy Pelosi, who will be out of her position as Speaker of the House after the November elections, don't, you know.
Bite your tongue.
Yes, okay. Forget that I said that. But she has accepted, every time she has run, endorsement by AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, which is a center-right major body connected with support for Israel, very often connected with the Republican Party, or at least neighbors of the Republican Party. Nancy Pelosi again accepted the support, the endorsement of AIPAC, but for the first time, she also accepted the endorsement of J Street. Now, for those of you who play the American political game, the American Jewish political game, J Street is clearly left of center and bordering on a little progressive. What's happening in the Democratic Party is the need to get more support from the left and far left. And when J Street offered its endorsement, this is good for Nancy Pelosi, but it reflects the fact that the active people involved in Israel Matters are more and more being found on the political left. And that, I guess, not a surprise, but folks, really significant for November and for 2 years, Steve Miller.
I was going to say that I was surprised doing a little research to find out how many candidates actually get the support of both organizations. And while I'm not a fan of J Street, as long as the congressional leaders like Nancy Pelosi that they're endorsing maintain their views supporting Israel, then I can see that as a good thing. I do not want to see it move our pro-Israel Congress people more toward the BDS progressive far left view of Israel.
I hear your very well put reservation, but to indicate to you that is what is happening in this endorsement and that she accepted it. J Street not only is demanding support, and I support that demand for a two-state solution, but in recent weeks, leadership of J Street has endorsed a confederation as the expression of the two-state solution. Okay? And the fact that they're out there and the fact that Nancy Pelosi wanted that has to stand by itself. All I'm saying is things are changing. And that wouldn't have happened. And by the way, AIPAC does not itself endorse. AIPAC now has a PAC. AIPAC is not a PAC. AIPAC is not an organization that funds political candidates. It is a public affairs committee. It is not a PAC in the sense of funding and supporting. J Street funds and supports, and AIPAC now has a PAC separate that funds and supports. So what we have is, I'm going to leave it sit that way. It is an interesting sign of changing times, and that Jewish activism is being found more frequently now on the left side of the equation, not just left of center, but progressive left.
Can I add one comment?
Sure.
On AIPAC, I used to be a supporter, but when they started funneling endorsements and money to Republicans who voted to overturn the election and who are supporting some of the Congress people who have said that the insurrectionists weren't that, I'm hoping more people they will get blowback. I don't see what the point of supporting a democracy in the Middle East is if you don't even believe you have a democracy in your own country.
Okay, I think that's a great comment again, Steve, but these are bullet designations. That's the way the language of politics. They don't mean they're going to shoot them, but bullet designations. AIPAC says, if you are a warm friend of Israel, we will support you. Since we are a bullet organization, we are not going to examine your attitude toward any other issue. Our goal is to protect Israel and to maintain financial and military support.
And that's okay. I just think there needs to be some limit, and they crossed the line.
Okay. Believe me, they had the argument. Believe me, it was an argument. This is where they came down. Next interesting thing, just because federations in this country in response, the Jewish federations in response to what's going on in Ukraine have raised in emergency extra funds $60 million. $60 million raised within the Jewish community through federations for a variety of programs designed to assist refugees, resettlement, housing, food, medicine, clothing, whatever, including security and whatever they can provide. So far, since the war started, now it's got to be 110 days or something like that. Since the war started, 50,000 Jews have left Ukraine. That's a number. That's a number. Jewish Federations of North America are doing a wonderful job. The national and the money that's being raised is being raised through local federations, and then at another level through the national operation. So, any comment about that? I thought that was pretty good. $60 million raised in the Jewish community for refugee relief, specifically going to, first of all, the Jewish refugees, and then going to all who are in need. All who are in need. Next, Steve Wright, the chief rabbi of Moscow, has fled. I could just tell you about that. When you play with a dictator, you either thrive or die. There really isn't I'm going to take a break for a while. Hey, Mr. Putin, don't call me. I'll call you. No. Either you are 100% in support of the dictator or you die. The chief rabbi of Moscow bragged for years about the close proximity of his ties with Putin, and now is basically what? He has refused to support the war, and now he's running for his life. He'll never be back in Moscow. So much for the chief rabbi. Remember the great teaching: if you support a dictator, you thrive or you die. You can quote me on that. Next, the other group that's having real trouble is Chabad. Why? Because Chabad itself had nurtured a very close relationship with Putin in order, this is what they said, to reclaim all of the Rebbe's books and writings and everything that were still inside the Soviet Union and inside Russia today. All of those negotiations have fallen apart, and Chabad is now also losing its standing with the Russian government. I'm not saying ha ha ha. I am saying ha ha ha. And you know, that's the way they're going to play. They bragged about it, and now they're paying for it. Another happy thing, and these are small pieces, we'll get to bigger pieces. You know that during the Passover Seder conducted by our vice president, on the table were discovered bottles of wine, manufactured, packaged, whatever, on the West Bank, and it created a scandal, right? You're all aware of that. It was a scandal, pretty funny scandal, but a scandal. The next proof that you better be careful where you are being photographed. The chief rabbi of the UK, Ephraim Mervis, was spotted at St. Paul's Cathedral in London attending a prayer service in honor of Queen Elizabeth II, Shetichya, may she live a long life. So what's the issue? Orthodox interpretation of halakha is that Jews are forbidden to enter a church, period. Joanne, do not make a face. No, you're telegraphing your reaction. And it's like, we can all tell. Okay. Mervis, therefore, violated a tradition going back to a ruling in the 1970s, and long before that, that Jews don't go to a church, don't go into a church, and most especially do not attend a service in a church. But the chief rabbi of the UK, he's chief rabbi only among the Orthodox, went to church. And so I'm curious, and curious people want to know what's going on. And then I found the 1970 ruling. Here's the 1970. The London Beit Din in 1970 ruled there is an exemption for those invited by the Queen. So Queen Elizabeth II invited to that service the chief of various religious groups and invited Mervis. So despite the fact that a lot of Orthodox Jews didn't know about that ruling and got really upset, Mervis is in good shape. He has a legal ruling that his attending that church service at the demand or command of the Queen was totally acceptable. Steve.
What's the reason for that ruling? I mean, you can't go to a wedding of a friend. I don't understand. You can go and not necessarily pray in their manner or whatever. I just don't understand the rationale.
Steve, you have major problems seeking for logic as we discuss halachic rulings. You'll have to outgrow that. But let me try to.
I thought they were smart rabbis.
Yeah, well, let me try to indicate this. In the early 1990s, I spent time with the Synagogue Council of America, which I should also add of blessed memory. Synagogue Council of America was a wonderful trans-denominational Jewish organization in which the congregational bodies like the URJ, United Synagogue, and the rabbinic bodies, CCAR, Rabbinic Assembly, and so forth, across the board in the Jewish community, all agreed to come together to support the work of the Synagogue Council of America on behalf of Jewish life around the world. It was a very, very good organization, Synagogue Council of America, with a history that if you Google it, you'd be pleased. They did all kinds of, they show up at the Vatican, they show up here, there, and everywhere. Wherever there's an international dialogue, Synagogue Council embodying all of the major Jewish organizations, religious organizations in America. Religious, like Hadassah is not part of it, but religious organization. One member of the Synagogue Council designated by the Orthodox Union, the OU, his job was to attend every public function and make certain that no Jew ended up in church. The threat was, if this organization, through a representative, is in a church service, more important than dropping by as a tourist, church service, they would blow up the Synagogue Council. When we traveled in Europe, we were meeting with cardinals and Vatican and all kinds of people. This guy was with us every step of the way, making certain that we never accepted an invitation to enter a church as a group, ever. I long since transitioned away from that, but only a couple of years later, several non-Orthodox rabbis attended a church service, and the synagogue council no longer is in existence.
Wow.
Okay, so, that moves it away from the logic to the application. I see Merle, I see Joanne, I see Harvey. Okay.
So does this mean that you wouldn't be, if you couldn't go to a funeral either? If a funeral service was in a church, does that mean you can't go to that funeral either?
As an Orthodox Jew, according to standard halakha interpretation, that's correct. It also means that, even a simpler way, we always had, these were so wonderful, the Thanksgiving, interfaith thing.
Right.
We couldn't go if it were held in a church.
What if the service is held at a cemetery?
If it is a Christian religious service, the answer remains the same.
Okay.
Oh, you said okay.
I'm not accepting it as it should be. I'm saying okay for telling me, because I was at a funeral this morning at a non-sectarian cemetery. I don't know it was a cemetery. I don't, not Jewish, but there was an Orthodox, a couple from here that I know very well, extremely Orthodox, and they were at that funeral, and in the chapel of the cemetery, because it's too hot to be outside, there was a short sort of a mass. And this is so current to what happened 2 hours ago.
You are now publicly acknowledging that you have spent time with apikorsim and those who violate the core of Jewish life. I am ashamed.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, don't be too sorry. But
I'm not.
But remember, lots of people observe or don't observe, right? The rabbis clearly wouldn't. I figured I used the example of Rabbi Mervis to open up the reality that Orthodox Jews view such religious services as tantamount to idolatry.
Okay. I have no other words at that point.
You have a way of saying things which communicates a lot. Okay. Trust me, this is not the way I live. This is not the way I teach, but this is a reality in certain parts of the Jewish world. Joanne.
Yeah, this is just off topic. I want everybody to know that the president is here. His helicopters just flew over my home.
Did you shoot him down?
Who flew over her home?
I did not. The president's helicopters.
They're having the South American, Central American meetings today, and it's in Los Angeles.
It's downtown, right?
Thank you, Joanne. I feel better because there's a lot of Secret Service, and they'll keep the homeless away, and so that's good. Okay. Okay. What did I say? Who's up next? Harvey?
Yeah. What happens when a church isn't used as a church? When they have like the Verdi Chorus, say in Santa Monica, for example, or when a Jewish temple rents a church building for their own services. How do the Orthodox look at that?
That is far easier to handle, and that probably wouldn't, either way, would not be a problem. In other words, we went to a beautiful concert. This is not really in the chapel of the YMCA in Jerusalem, and people were there across the broad spectrum of Jewish identity. Not a problem. It's used at that point as a symphony hall. And then if, by the way, a church can be decommissioned the way a synagogue can be decommissioned. Decommissioning a synagogue is a painful, difficult problem. It is not simple. However, as long as we're only here and there's a small group of good friends, I will tell you that once when visiting Pittsburgh, my host, a native Pittsburghian, took me to the inn restaurant bar place. It is in a church. The church had been decommissioned. The major bar was on the altar. Other things were there, and there's absolutely no reason of course, the Orthodox Jews wouldn't eat there because it's not kosher, but that would have been acceptable. Howard.
I heard Rabbi Shlomo Riskin a long time ago when he was actually giving the Friday night talk at the Friday night service at Kehillat Israel. And he told us that he normally does not attend or enter into non-Orthodox synagogues for the same reason that he wouldn't enter into a non-Orthodox church. And but he did enter. He said he made an exception, so apparently it's not that strong. He was there to raise money.
And did he want everyone to go, oh, thank you for your liberalism? I would not have applauded.
No, he said that he wouldn't attend because they light candles in the service after sundown. And
not only that, there could be a woman chazan, a woman rabbi, God forbid, all kinds of abominations.
Well, this is Rabbi Riskin. He's a very modern Orthodox rabbi, I believe, and he didn't say that, but
that is also true. That is also absolutely true. Rabbi Riskin had moved from the Lincoln Square Synagogue in New York City to establish his own self-contained community in Israel.
In Efrat.
In Efrat. And he is the chief rabbi of Efrat. And bless you. And in that capacity, he sought approval from the chief rabbinate to be able to officiate at conversions. He was refused. And he was refused because of the exceptions that he made.
Right.
And then there was such an uproar at this idiocy that the decision was reversed. But
even he had some qualms about entering in this case, Reconstructionist synagogue. It's true. Or at least he said it.
Rabbi is one of the truly significant rabbis of our day. I read his Torah commentaries.
Right.
I've met him, talked with him. He is, in a complicated world, a good person. But I'll be damned if I'm going to congratulate an Orthodox rabbi for doing what I think is moral, ethical, reasonable, and appropriate. And, you know, I'm glad he showed up for the fundraiser. I'm glad he makes exceptions. But boy, that does not warm the cockles of my heart in terms of, well done, Rabbi, you showed up in a profane place. No, I guess I'm being harsh. Okay. Okay, there's that. Now, those are the simple things. Do those same rabbis welcome clergy of other religions into their services? Answer, yes. Who asked that question? Steve. Answer, yes. Yes. What about a non-Jewish chaplain offering a prayer before us? That's a different setting. Like when people ask some minister someplace to give a blessing so that a major communal event can begin. The Orthodox rabbis would absent themselves from that part of the event if they could. If not, they sat and it happened. We're talking specifically about a place of worship. Now we have a problem. How many of you have been reading about the killing of a woman journalist in Israel? Okay. The journalist was a staff person of Al Jazeera, which is a very successful Arab and now English language broadcast system, news reporting system. They are big. They have journalists all over the place. And they're not just reporting on Israel-Palestinian, but they're Al Jazeera journalists in the United States reporting on the United States, interpreting it through the prism of the way they understand the world. There was violence initiated by Palestinians, violence that grew to be of such significance that the army came in, Israeli army came in to put down the disturbance. In that process, this journalist was shot in the head and killed. Another journalist was shot in the chest, but because the journalists wear bulletproof vests, he was hurt but survived. She was wearing the vest, but she had no protection here. CNN, a UN committee, which isn't persuasive, but a UN committee, the Palestinian Authority, and other international groups have condemned Israel for killing a journalist at work, a journalist who was wearing all kinds of stuff saying, "Don't kill me, I'm a journalist," all that stuff, to shoot and hit her in the head where she wasn't protected. They have video. It's not determinative. It's not clear that it definitely was an Israeli soldier. The Palestinians will not join a combined search process with Israelis, though they have been invited to do so. The Palestinians apparently have the bullet that killed her, and the Israelis apparently have the gun that fired the bullet. The Palestinians will not share the bullet with the Israelis because they say that Israelis would deface, ruin the bullet so that it can't be used. They don't trust. The New York Times came out with a very large editorial finding all of this really unacceptable. Israel's initial response was There are always journalists embedded during times of struggle, but they do so at their own risk. That response drew huge shrieks of anger from the journalism community, from the United Nations, from many members of the US Congress. This is a true public relations disaster. This is a true possibility of an assault on a journalist. This is a true blackening of Israel's reputation in the world, unless or until it could be conclusively proved to be wrong, and that doesn't look likely. I can't say what it does look like, but it doesn't sound likely. We pause for your comments. Any thoughts? Any thoughts? Howard. You're muted, Howard.
I think you've covered in a fairly impartial way. You've given most of the facts. I don't think that the Israelis would say they have the gun that fired the bullet. They said that they have guns which, if it came from the Israeli side, it would have been from such a gun. And as for proof, I mean, the fact that the Palestinians, the PLO can say, well, we're not going to cooperate with the Israelis because they're blood-sucking monsters and liars, so therefore they would cheat. That doesn't excuse the fact that they're not handing over the forensic evidence. The forensic evidence could prove that the Israelis did do it. The fact that they're not handing it over, despite what they say, proves to me that they know that they don't have a case. And it's much easier just to say, as they did from the moment this thing happened, well, the Jews did it. The Jews shot our wonderful journalist. And
by the way, she was a wonderful journalist. She was the top-ranked, seriously good journalist.
Right, that's what it is. I've never listened to any of her stuff, but she's had been doing it for a long time. She's a Christian Arab. And I listened to one of the Al Jazeera reports, the few that actually go into any actual evidence. It was a hysterical rant by a journalist about how they killed our wonderful colleague, but it did go into evidence that they apparently, in their eyes, proved something, and it was really weak. I mean, I don't want to go into all the details, but the main evidence they had was that other PLO people in the area said they didn't see any Arab snipers around. And another evidence is that it killed her because she had a helmet and a vest. In order to kill her, it had to go just at the right angle. That proves that the Jews did it. And from there it goes downhill. There's no evidence. There's no evidence. It might be true. I don't know. We don't have the facts, but there's no public proof. And yet everyone, including CNN in one of their reports, and I think the New York Times and somebody at the UN says, well, the Jews killed a journalist.
The New York Times didn't say that. The New York Times condemned both sides, but especially condemned the comments that Israelis made that, in the French, c'est la guerre. That's what happens in wartime, no big deal.
I think there was another at New York Times, maybe.
Yeah, but that response by a series of Israelis really didn't help. I saw Donna had her hand up.
Yeah, Rabbi, isn't there kind of like an international community that can vote on that they bring the evidence for it to prove that Israel didn't do this? Can't that be done on both sides for peace? I mean, this is just terrible.
An international tribunal could be set up, but it's extremely unlikely that that's going to happen. All that we're going to be left with is a dead highly respected journalist, and Israel, which couldn't put together a response that would have been caring and open and truthful. Both sides are now stonewalling and yelling at each other. It is not over. It's going to be in the paper for a long time. Ray?
Thanks. Sorry, it took me a moment to unmute. So I'm going to ask a couple naive questions so that others who are almost as naive as I don't have to do that. There are a couple things that I'm unclear on here. Number one, I'm under-informed as for reporting on this incident and reactions to this incident. I'll say that right up front. The second is a larger question that I often have in my mind when these kinds of disputes happen between Israel and Arab factions, Palestinian factions, which is I honestly do not have a clear understanding about what is meant when somebody says Israel or the Arabs, or when we talk about jurisdiction, what is the controlling entity that hypothetically, if the bullet that was recovered were to be turned over to Israel, in quotes, who is that authority? Who would be surrendering the bullet and who would they be turning it over to? And why might we believe that there is some greater authority or legitimate authority of the body that the bullet would be turned over into? I'm very foggy on who these parties are.
Thank you, Ray. Let me just try to set a perspective. One, we're living at a time in which journalists are being killed. They're being killed in lots of places. And there is real outrage when that happens anywhere. So that the killing of a journalist, possibly by Israelis, is weighted far more than it might otherwise be weighted. This is a time when journalists are being killed in rather serious numbers. And for those of us all of us, who believe in a free press as essential to the democratic experiment, we have to protect journalists. Number two, journalists by their nature go into places where there's loads of danger. Whether it's near a fire, whether it's an active shooter, whether it's wartime, journalists are there. And they are to be seen and protected. They are wearing their visible insignia. No one who would shoot a journalist would not be doing it intentionally. This is a target. And if you target journalists, you are on the wrong side of democracy. Third, when we say the Arabs, and Ray, it's a fine question, you have to look for the context. If you're going to say the Arabs and setting oil prices, you know whom you're going to be talking about. You're going to be talking about Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Abu Dhabi and whatever. You're going to be talking to those folks. When you're going to be talking about an incident during violence between Palestinians and Israelis, the de facto voice of the Arabs is the Palestine Authority, Abu Mazen. He's the guy, that's the group. And in a sense, that makes sense. But the reality is, of all the powers in the Middle East, the Palestinian Authority is not among the biggest powers. So by leaving the Palestinians in charge with Palestinian problems, one also leaves Palestinians rearranging the ships, the furniture on the Titanic, the deck furniture. But it would be the Palestine Authority that would deliver the bullets or bullet to the examining authority in Israel, which is the IDF, the Israel Defense Force. That's fairly simple.
I love the idea.
Okay. Now, any other question? Harvey?
Yeah. Haven't the Palestinians and the Israelis disturbed the crime scene already? And wouldn't the bullet be fairly useless by now?
No, the bullet is not fairly useless by now unless it's been marred.
Well, how do you know it's the bullet that actually killed the journalist?
They claim it was the one removed from the journalist.
They claim.
We're stuck with that, Harvey. We're stuck with that.
That's what I mean by disturb the crime scene. If you had an international organization go in right away and find the bullet, then it'd be a different story. But I could see where the Israelis would be coming from and saying, I don't trust these guys. They could come up with any bullet.
Yeah, but come on, Harvey. There isn't going to be an international group that's going to paratroop into the middle of an active war zone.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
So that's not going to happen. And there are things. If you watch NCIS, you know that there could be DNA from the blood on the bullet. I feel like one of those. You see that commercial where something happens and a woman jumps up and I'll handle it. And someone says, "Are you a doctor?" No, but I've watched a lot of doctor shows. So the DNA on the bullet would likely be there unless it was wiped clean. Okay, and we'd love to know that. But the rifling on the bullet, the actual marks made as the bullet whirls through the barrel. Do I sound like I know what I'm talking about? The rifling, I don't. That is unique as a fingerprint. That is as unique as a fingerprint. They can, with absolute certainty, say this bullet came from this gun, if they have the gun. And that's why you see in labs, having them shoot the gun so they can compare that bullet with the bullet that came out of the Vic. Okay. I do recommend that you watch all these shows so that you can understand the news. This is a huge topic. It's not going away. I promised Steve that I would cover this at least in part. There is the coalition of government in Israel is somewhere past moribund. I'm not quite sure exactly how to describe it. This unlikely governing alliance is leaking members and reclaiming members. They have a 1-vote majority in the Knesset. Lose 2 members, the opposition could have a vote and replace them and call for elections. Over the past 2 months, members of the governing coalition have dropped out and been lured back, dropped out and been lured back. The reason for the dropping out is always a matter of, I have an opportunity to exercise leverage so that I could get something that I really want. And it's horse trading at its most grotesque. But now the government was forced into a problem. Every year, the government is required to renew a key piece of Knesset legislation that extends Israeli law to the Jewish settlers in the occupied West Bank area. Since 1967, the Knesset has passed a law, a resolution, whatever, that meant that Israelis living in the settlements would be covered by, protected by Israeli law, lest there be any question if they're living in a Palestinian zone as to which law would govern the treatment of that Israeli. This month, it came up for renewal and was defeated. That should spell the end of the dream of this coalition government. The newspapers call the vote a death rattle. I'll accept that. It's a death rattle. What's going on? Who voted against it? Number one, those in the coalition from the far left who are so opposed to the occupation that they'd want to do nothing to sustain the occupation. So they voted against it. The Arab party, Ra'am, who is supporting revolutionary, supporting the current government, doesn't want it because that law makes it easier for Israel to maintain the occupation. And the Arabs are opposed. So the far left is opposed. The Arabs are opposed. And then, you ready for this? Standard right-wing Likud government people for whom the adoption of this law is a part of their DNA. They want the occupation, they want it permanent, and they want the Israelis covered by Israeli law. They voted against because more important than the occupation is trying to bring Netanyahu back into the premiership. And so people who have fought for year after year, it comes up, we vote, we pass it. These are the people who fought for it and got it year after year, now voted against it because worse than weakening our hold on the West Bank is a missed opportunity to destroy the current government. We only have about 4 minutes left. There's a lot to talk about, but I want to open to brief questions, and we'll just see what you're thinking about this. This is, do not believe that President Biden's cancellation of a trip to the Middle East, which just occurred, is not, at least in part, a reflex of this defeat of the coalition government. Okay, hands. I see Donna.
Yes, I was just wondering, because I always thought Moshe used to say, may he rest in peace, they need to annex the West Bank and they need to send everybody, all the Palestinians to Egypt. But anyway, he used to say that just like so much because there's so many problems, but no one's going to allow that. But that would be, just give them their homeland and send them back to Egypt.
Okay, comments, please. Comments, please. This is by the way, Howard put in a very good and correct thing, a note that I asked you to read. dealing with the fact that, in fact, there was a call for a joint there's a word for it, inquiry into the death of the journalist, and the PLO refused because it doesn't trust or doesn't want to deal with. Steve.
So from what you've said, the fact that we've never heard of this settler bill before is because it's been going on for decades as almost a ministerial act that no one paid attention to?
Totally. Yes, thank you. Totally. It was simply that. I mean, the whole right wing wanted it. The religious wanted it. And it was a slam dunk. That's why no one ever heard of it. It came, yeah, you said a ministerial, a resolution. Boom, next. It was that kind of a thing. I'm sure some people spoke against it, but what? Risa, what? What's happening? Oh, okay. Bye, Gilroy. Bye-bye. Okay. People active all over the place. So yes, Steve, you're totally correct. That's why we haven't heard of it. It was slam dunk. And now it's being used as a tool to rip down the government. Question. We don't know what the outcome of this is going to be. The settler bill failed. They may try to bring the bill up again. I think with this bill, it is increasingly likely that a right-wing and religious coalition will form. And the battle politically will be not anybody but Bibi, which is what brought the coalition together in the first place. But it's going to be, will the new government be headed by Bibi or not? So one of the things that could sustain the current government from falling is the bloodletting that will occur if the government falls and the right wing has to do battle with, for, and against Bibi Netanyahu. And they may not want that battle. Brad.
Sorry to show my ignorance, Rabbi, but explain how how an Israeli government is brought down. Can you, a very big picture, explain
120
how that happens?
120 people, 61 votes to make a government. If there is a no confidence vote or a failure on a vote that the government says is the rise and fall of the government stands with this, we need it passed. So the two things, one is a new majority forms against, or a major bill that the government puts all of its chips on fails. And that would mean the fall of a government means the calling of a new election. There is in the parliamentary process the capacity to replace a member of the party who is prime minister with another member of the party who's prime minister without calling an election. That's the same in the UK, it's same here. I mean, you know, that's how that works. It is just interesting that the thought of civil strife within Likud may be all that's keeping the current non-Likud government in place. And if they ever, there's a guy named Sar, S-A-apostrophe-A-R, who is really instrumental, justice minister, really instrumental in bringing this vote forward. Sar joined the coalition and got his position by being opposed to Bibi. This week, Saar pushed the vote on the settler bill and said he could vote for Bibi. So this stuff is now happening. We have, despite Steve Miller, we have one class left in 2 weeks, and we're going to have to solve all the problems of the world then. So please come fully informed. And thank you for, Susie, you didn't say anything to me all day. Okay, I mean, I can't hear you, but at least I see your mouth moving. That's a pleasure. Okay, that's good. I mean, okay, I saw Herb and Sylvia. I see them. I see Miriam. Hi. Haven't said, let's see, I said hello to everybody else. Okay. Helen and Dee Dee. Helen Sperling and Dee Dee. So fine. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank
I hope
you.
you all feel as messed up as our world is. Have a good day.
Now it's clarified as to how messed up it is.
Really. Bye, Miriam. Bye, Miriam.
Hi, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Love you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brad, for your comments. You're very smart.
Hannah, are you still on? Hannah, go.
Yeah, I'm